Okay. Pete, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, I still see other folks on the screen, but you may have done it with the other.
Yep, we won't see it on the recording.
Okay. So folks, thank you for coming. This is a ways of introduction. Invasive plant management is an area that is a sort of a concrete way to make a difference for our environment. Today's world we have so many challenges of what can we do to make a difference for the habitat and for wildlife, and invasive plant management is one of the concrete ways. As a way of background, I just want you to know I came into the field of wildlife through my background from UConn, and I started working for DEEP back in 1990. I worked 5 years at the Connecticut Ag Experiment Station before that in animal wildlife damage management research. So I have about 5 years of that work, and then since 1990 with DEEP. And my background, plants are my favorite subject, and it makes the habitat. And tonight I'm going to share with you as much as I can. It's hard to give you everything that I know about invasives in this short talk, but there's 97 invasives here in Connecticut. But I am going to highlight about 5 species, and I'm going to try to give many different examples of how we what about managing them. But of course, you could spend a lifetime of learning in this field. So I'm going to share as best I can with you practical examples. So I always start my talk off with a positive note, and that is back when bald eagles were scarce. When I was a kid growing up, I didn't see any bald eagles in Connecticut. And today there's over 70 pairs nesting. And that took a change in people's attitudes and feelings about it. We basically said, we want the bald eagle back. What do we do nationwide? We cleaned up the environment, removed the DDT and the biomagnification, and today we have success. People wanted the bald eagle back. They wanted birds of prey to survive. And invasive species is a little bit, it's not as dramatic, or I call it, an eagle's like a charismatic megafauna. It's charismatic and people really care about it. But believe it or not, that cottonwood that eagle's sitting in right there, right next to the Quinnipiac River, locally where I live. When I was a kid, I didn't see any bald eagles. And now there's, right where that bird is sitting, there's 2 nests within, about 3 or 4 miles. So it's really amazing to have an animal come back. Now, habitat is very similar, and we're going to be basically thinking about habitat. And if we galvanize our thoughts and minds about making a better environment, invasives can also be tackled, and it won't be as charismatic as the bald eagle come back. But those of us who understand habitat, every square foot of land here in Connecticut, there's 3 million acres. For every square foot that you change from invasive to native, you will make a difference. And there's 3 million acres in Connecticut. There's 3 million people. And I know that in my lifetime now, I've been doing this, like I said, since 1990. I know examples of fields that are now clean of most invasives. And I'm going to share those examples with you. And I'm going to use my, not only my work experience, but I also, since 2004, my family and I have been managing 41 acres over in Sprague, Connecticut. It's an old farm, abandoned farm. And I'm going to share a few examples from there. So, I walk the walk, live this every day. And I want to share with you as best I can some examples. So 2 things are going to reduce the biological diversity of our state: habitat loss or fragmentation. And then the second greatest threat is invasive species. And if you only go back 30 years ago, people weren't talking about invasives. We didn't really, kind of took them for granted. But as they started accumulating on the land, and the impacts became more and more obvious. And invasive species are the second greatest threat to our biological diversity on the earth here, and here in Connecticut and the United States. So what is going to be the future of our landscape? Well, folks like you and I that want to make a difference, every invasive we manage is one less invasive that is going to take the spot and usurp the plant, the water, the nutrients, the space that a native plant would be growing. And you literally can make a difference one plant at a time, every plant you remove. If you remove a large tree of heaven, you make a huge difference because you don't not only knock out that acreage that square footage that it's filling up on the ground, but you also have that vertical 100-foot of space that it uses. So you could do it large scale or you could do it small scale, but you can make a big difference. So whenever we get involved in habitat management, we have to know what's in our toolbox. What is it that we have? And this beautiful landscape, it's one of my favorite photos that I've taken. I took it accidentally. I didn't purposefully think this was going to be an awesome photo. I was taking a picnic dinner with my wife on the bank of the impoundment where this Crescent Lake in Southington, where my hometown is here. And I couldn't believe the angle of the sun and the beautiful foliage that year was incredible. The future landscape is going to depend on what we decide. Those are beautiful sugar maples, red maples, and diversity of plants that are native to this area. And it's vulnerable to invasion of what's in the understory. There's Norway maples under there. And what happens when the ice storms come in and it topples these trees? What's going to come up in the understory? It's going to depend on what's there, what's growing there. We hope that we can reduce the amount of invasives that are going to be usurping this beautiful, colorful landscape. 2,800 plants make up our landscape. And now the herbarium at UConn, and I got this information. There's a book that you can get that's at Conn College, and it's all the vascular plants of Connecticut. I rounded it down to 2,800. 1,800 were originally, and I rounded it down so you can remember, 1,800 are native plants. The 1,800 were the ones that co-evolved with our wildlife. There's 1,000 that all of our relatives, friends, and brought over from all over the world. And it started with the Mayflower when it landed. They brought the animals, the feed for the animals, the forage. That was when it first invasion of non-native plants came here. And from there, there's about 1,000, and I've rounded those down. 97 of those 1,000 invasive, those 1,000 non-native plants, 97 are listed as invasive. You can Google it, and you can get that list and be familiar with it. It's put together originally by the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group, and then now there's a council that's got legal authority that referees that list. And it's appointed by the governor. It's a legal body. But anyway, that's just the list. So you have in your mind, what are the tools? If you were going to bake a cake, what are you going to put in your cake? Well, those 1,800 native plants will give you a delicious, perfect cake. You add in those other ingredients, and you don't know what you're going to get. Okay, and I use that as a kind of a metaphor example. But anyway. You want to avoid those 97. Everybody loves color. And unfortunately, we fall into the trap of just saying, I want to buy something that's really colorful. And everybody went out and they bought burning bush. And now it's in the understory of our forests and it's along the roads. We know better today. We will plant things like, this is not burning bush. This is high bush blueberry. And a lot of times I'm walking around the landscape and I'll see something beautiful like this and somebody's with me. Hey, what's that plant over there? And a lot of times people will mistake high bush blueberry for burning bush because they're so used to thinking that burning bush is the only beautiful red color in the fall. Well, that's a beautiful high bush blueberry. And then if you take a nice close-up shot, it's amazing how beautiful our native high bush blueberry. Imagine if we thought about the ecological value of plants instead of just the aesthetic value, right? Of course, we want to blend the two, but there's so many beautiful native plants this plant not only feeds the birds and the wildlife, it feeds us because we can make, pies out of them. But the bumblebees that feed on the blossom, there's specialty bumblebees that feed on the blossom of this plant. And of course, there's the lowbush blueberry. So just keep in mind that if we think ecological, there's so many beautiful plants out there. Another, I call it instant results or instant gratification. People will go out and buy buddleia. And they're like, oh, I want to see a lot of butterflies. There's no larval caterpillar that will grow on buddleia. So you put buddleia out there and you get butterflies, and it's kind of like going to the 7-Eleven and buying a big gulp and gulping it down and saying, wow, my thirst has been quenched. But you didn't drink a really high nutritious juice. You're basically drinking sugar water. Well, I look at the same thing with buddleia. We're doing it for the reason of attracting butterflies. But do we think about the future of butterflies? Do we think about the native common milkweed and orange milkweed that we need so that the caterpillar will thrive and then the monarch butterfly can survive? This is a photo I took at Hammonasset one day on a September day. Look at the beautiful butterflies there on the evergreens along that way, along that walkway there on the beach area. I was astounded. I thought that only happened in Mexico. But anyway, we're not going to have that beautiful scene if we don't all start changing and putting more native plants on the landscape like the milkweeds. Okay, so animals need 4 things to survive: water, food, water, shelter, cover, space. And the arrangement. The more native 1800 plants you put out there and you arrange them and put them on the landscape, the more likelihood you're going to have biological diversity. Invasive plants have some food value, some cover value, but it's very limited, and it doesn't have the type of quality that we need. And our pollinators that are out there that are starting to decline depend on our native plants, and so do a lot of our wildlife. So you guys all know that invasives were reported. I mentioned there's 97, but there's 1,000 imported non-native plants. 97 in Connecticut are invasive. They're aggressive. They spread in the environment when you plant them. They don't stay where you plant them. And then they displace our native plants and they degrade the habitat. They not necessarily wipe out the habitat, but it degrades it. What I'm going to do for you is, this is an aerial photo of Sessions Woods, and those are like tumors on the landscape. There's 13 of them there. And if you visited Sessions, you're going to notice that we did a pretty good job of knocking these 13 out. It's always a challenge, but most of them are knocked out. I'm going to give you these 5. I'm going to give you examples of these 5 invasives, okay? And I'm going to draw from my work as a biologist working for the state of Connecticut, working on state lands and wildlife management areas. And then I'm also going to pull, as I told you, from my private work, okay? Now, I want to share this one little graph, though, because I want to, it's an important concept that I want to get across. This is a time axis here, right? And here's abundance. So here's time and abundance. If you had plants at low abundance early in time here, if you took action when there's very few of them, you won't let them get to this J-shaped curve here, okay? Exponential growth. A lot of times people take action when it's up here. So the more you can take action, identify invasives, just as they start growing, the best it is for you, because you're going to be able to spend less time and energy and resources in knocking it out. So whenever you could do early detection and rapid response, it's great. But we don't always have that opportunity. And when you're first getting into it, it's going to seem overwhelming. But you're going to see that over time, you will make a lot of progress. The first plant I want to highlight is invasive Japanese stiltgrass. And here is an aerial photo of Sessions Woods. Here's Route 69. Here's our building, 764 acres. And one day I was driving by that spot and I noticed right here is a patch of green that I never saw before. And I pulled over, looked at it, and sure enough, it was Japanese stiltgrass. Now, Japanese stiltgrass is an annual, so its seed grows every year. It's not perennial, so it has to seed in every year. So the advantage to that is that you could easily pull it up, or it's more easily killed. If you get it early and you don't let it spread, you can get it. If you wait too long, and here's a close-up. If you look at the blade, it has a uneven blade here. It's thinner on one side and wider on the other. It has this white vein down the middle. And so, that's a diagnostic aspect of it. And when you pull it up, it's got very fibrous roots. It's an annual. It will die. If you pull it up, it will die. So it's an annual. This is an example of one that got away, a population that got away. And you can see it's all over the understory. So you don't want it to get to that stage. In this case, since it's an annual, this is one that you could, pull or the organic methods are challenging, but so I know that the vinegar works on that as an annual, but also you could use spot herbicide too, but it that's one. It's an annual that you can't successfully kill with the vinegar and organic method, but killing it early by pulling it up is the best way, and then never letting it go to seed by cutting it into the early fall so it doesn't go to seed. Then the plant dies back. Anytime you can, you want to encourage the native grasses, and whenever I always include some native species into my talks so that I encourage you to think about the native little blue stem switchgrass, big blue stem. And the reason I do that is I want you to think about planting bunch grasses that bunch rather than clone. And these are turkeys that are stripping the seeds off of the little blue stem. They're taking the little fluffy seed off the blue stem. This deer tongue grass is it's a perennial, and I got this video one winter where I watched this junco climb up a dried deer tongue grass, and there's little millet seeds at the top of that, and you'd see them feeding on it. But you watch, you see them pick it out of there. Favor the native grasses as much as you can. If you could add in these native plants to your fields and edges, they're very valuable. They're bunch grasses. They bunch instead of clone. There's lots of nooks and crannies that other wildflowers can grow and native plants can grow, and wildlife can find things in between. The other invasive that I've been able to manage because I got it early, again at Sessions Woods, is winged euonymus. Here's what it looks like in the understory. There's the berry that the birds eat. It has this little cork-like wing structure on the stems that is diagnostic. Sometimes it's real thin, sometimes it's real wide. Ripping it up works if they're young. You got young winged euonymuses, I rip them up, hang them upside down. Very effective. Later, I'm going to talk to you about cutting and painting. So I'm not going to discuss that here right now, but you'll hear in my autumn olive example. So I don't want to duplicate how we do the cut and paint, but you could also cut the stems and paint, dab on herbicide, and I'll cover that in the autumn olive example. But this works very well with small winged euonymus plants, and we're effectively removing them from the western side of our property, where they're coming in from the adjoining neighborhood where the birds are dropping the seeds in. The next example I want to give you is the Oriental bittersweet example. And that's one of my, it's a personal example that I've managed since 2004, every opportunity that I can on my own land. So it's not paid work, but it's work that I do and me and my family, and I'll share with you those examples. And I do that on state land, but I do it very aggressively on these 40 acres. And I'll share with you how we've done it. And it's very rewarding when you go back 4 or 5 years later and you say, wow, what a difference. So here are the vines. And, you know, they're prolific seeders. They will strangle all your trees, and they'll distort trees. They're very aggressive plant. You know, you see what it did to this cherry. I take a bow saw and I'll cut a slice through. That penny's there for size. If you slice through a bittersweet with a bow saw, sometimes if it's really large, I might use a chainsaw, but most of the time I use a bow saw or a lopper, pruner. I always follow up with dabbing, and I use triclopyr, brush begun. And I'll put it on the cut stem, and that's a Buckmaster dabber. It's kind of like a bingo dabber container. And what that does is, see, this is a stem that wasn't dabbed. See how it grew these sprouts. So if you dab them, you'll prevent the sprouting, and then you'll also, if at least you'll stop the sprouting, and also some of it could translocate into the roots. And that's all about timing. And I know there's going to be questions about when do you do it. There's never a bad time to do invasive plant management, but from spring through the growing season is the best time, because when you dab the stem, you can't prevent the sprouting. If you cut in the winter, they will resprout. You know, they'll resprout in the spring. So the best time is during the growing season. But if you cut and paint your stems, this is our handiwork here. You can see all the dead and dying vines. Some of these trees had 60 to 80% coverage of vines, and we'll lose trees. They'll just die out. If you cut the vines and paint them, and all that biomass will fall off the trees eventually. It takes 2 or 3 years, but it'll just fall off. It'll rot off. You can save trees from falling over from the weight, and then they'll start getting photosynthesis again. And you could save a whole forest, a whole patch of forest. And if you do this every year and you go back, you will be rewarded. And if there's a plant out there that you can net good rewards by doing work, cutting, this is a plant that is worth going after. And cut, paint the stem. When very effective. And I use triclopyr, and I'll talk about the chemical that we use. I don't know of any organic method that works systemically to kill the roots of this plant. So unfortunately, in order to kill the roots or stop the stump sprouting, you have to use herbicide, and I use triclopyr, which is like a brush begun. The next example I want to give you is Tree of Heaven. And Tree of Heaven, this is Housatonic River WMA. It was when we acquired the property in the early 2000s, it was infested. Those fields were infested with Tree of Heaven, large ones. You'll see photos of them. Just to give you an idea of, we had over 150 large ones, and then we had, we had 23 greater than 8 inches, and then we had 150, along the field edges down there. And if you have any idea about Tree of Heaven was introduced by a Philadelphia gardener. And the nasty part of it is that it displaces by not only cloning itself, it clones and it grows, but there's a chemical that was identified in chemical ecology. It's a phytotoxic compound that actually suppresses the other plants around it. So not only does it displace it physically, but it also spreads a chemical that suppresses the other growth of other plants. And it's also the larval host of the spotted lanternfly, which unfortunately arrived in Connecticut a couple of years ago, which is a nasty one for agriculture. So the seeds are prolific. There's male and female. There's a male and a female clone. So the female will grow the seeds. The male clones don't grow seeds. Amazing amount of seeds for a mature plant. They can go up to 100 feet tall. They're very prolific. They will sprout. If you cut them, they will root sucker. So it's important to know that when you cut them, they will spread through their root suckering. But they'll do that naturally even without cutting them. But that's how they do a lot of reproductive. They'll reproduce themselves through root suckering, as well as the seed. The seed can go far, and if you have to prioritize, you want to get the female trees managed first. These seeds were spreading not only along the banks of the Housatonic, but they were floating downstream, and who knows how many thousands of plants grew from that. So we took action. How did we do it? Well, you can see here, this patch. You can see where it's been cut. We use large drum chop equipment. We use we contracted an excavator with a drum chop head on it, and we had all the smaller trees chopped up, and we treated the stumps at the base. Then the larger ones we took and we double chainsawed. We did girdling, so we double chainsawed, and we also took a machete or a woodsman pal, and we girdled the outside. They're pretty thin barked, and then we also infused Garland 3A, which is triclopyr, in these cracks to cause the tree to die. Now you can see the effectiveness here. These are all dead. We were very effective. We had amazing control there. This is the herbicide that we used, Garland 3A, which is a triclopyr. That's the name of the chemical. Brush Be Gone has that in it. But the double chainsaw, you go in about a quarter, you're right below you don't want to go too deep. You want to go just below the bark layer. And we do double banded. We do a double band. And because sometimes if you only do one, it'll jump the cut. The plant will heal itself. We also use this woodsman pal or the machete to chop. We use both methods. And then we used a bottle sprayer that you have to follow the label, but we were able to squirt into those crevices, and then the tree died slowly. You don't want the tree to die very fast. You want it to die slowly, and that's what happens. And then gradually the trees will fall. You can see here we had great success. If you go down to Housatonic River WMA, I challenge you to find a tree of heaven, and it's over 500 acres. We managed it. It's a doable and manageable species if you want to manage it. If you have that on your lands, it's very doable, very manageable. And of course, after you do this, you will get clonal sprouting. So you need to follow up. And we did some mechanical removal. You could mechanically remove them, but unfortunately, any roots that stay in the ground, they will resprout, but gradually they'll fade out. So you can do some mechanical, but the best that we found was a foliar application of triclopyr using a backpack sprayer. And we were able to effectively kill the growing vegetation as well as the roots. And then, of course, the cut stump. Whenever you cut the stump, you make a fresh cut. You want to apply or dab or squirt, the triclopyr onto that stump. The other example was at Simsbury. We had Tree of Heaven, and same thing. Now we have the Farmington River here instead of the Housatonic They like that sandy, disturbed soil. You know, tree of heavens thrives on sandy, disturbed soils. They'll grow virtually anywhere, even crack of a sidewalk. What was amazing was I found it competing. There's tree of heaven was competing directly with native staghorn. It was like a battle between the two, and we were able to save the staghorn from dying by knocking out the tree of heaven on that spot. And just to give you an idea, the tree of heaven, these are some of the close-ups of the stem. It's a very smooth stem. It's got a smooth stem, compound leaves. If you break it, it stinks like terrible. One of our botanists, Charlotte Pyle, called it Martian peanut butter or something. Anyway, stinky Martian peanut butter. I've never smelled stinky Martian peanut butter, but if you smell tree of heaven, it stinks. It's very unique, stinky odor. The compound leaf, when it falls off, it has a huge bundle leaf scar here. And you can mistake it for sumac. So, you know, if in the fall, the sumacs turn red and they have red berries. The poison sumac has white berries. So the non-poisonous sumacs are red berried, but they turn a beautiful, brilliant red color in the fall. The tree of heaven, I've never seen them turn any beautiful color. They're kind of drab, yellow green. And then, of course, the staghorn has the fuzzy bark. Okay. And here's the seed head of the staghorn sumac. Robins and our songbirds during migration require persistent winter foods, and you really want to. You really need to keep the these on the landscape for spring, when the birds are coming back in the spring, and then in the winter for the overwintering animals. Here I'll give you a few examples. Here's a patch of sumac. One blizzard, I was driving by this spot, and you'll see a flock of robins in here. There was a late spring storm or early spring storm, and you'll see the robin here feeding on the staghorn sumac. I've seen bluebirds, flickers, thrushes, hermit thrushes. It's amazing the amount of birds. And then turkeys will feed on them on the ground. It's a great winter food, very important coevolution with our wildlife here in Connecticut, very important plant. Here's one feeding under a power line. A flock of robins were under a power line feeding on these staghorn sumacs. Remember to, oops, I'm going way ahead of myself here. If you get the female trees, that's great. Get the female trees. I had a patch of male trees, 14 of them on my land in Sprague. And, they were big. They were a good 12 to 14 inches in diameter. It was a big clone on the edge of a field. They're gone. I challenge you to find one on the land. But if I had let that population grow, it would have gotten huge. It would have, they were already 80 feet tall. They didn't grow any seeds, but they were the male clones. And I did the same thing, girdled and chainsawed, and knocked out any sprouts, and they're gone. They're very rarely can you say you can kill something 100%, knock it off the land. Tree of heaven is one of them that if you put your mind to it, you can effectively remove it from your land. And it's one that takes up vertical space and horizontal. So it's one taking the multiple layers of the forest and the horizontal and vertical layering that becomes a biological desert. So what I recommend you do is you locate where your tree of heaven patches are on your land, whether it's one tree or whether it's a big patch, and prioritize the ones that are the female producing, the seed producing patches. Then girdle them, as I mentioned, treat using an herbicide. If you just cut it, it's going to snub sprout. So you need to do some kind of management on my recommendation is to use a triclopyr-based herbicide. You can foliar spray the stump sprouts. I've tried burning them, but it won't kill the root. Like, hitting them with a torch, it won't kill the roots. But so you need to follow up with a foliar. You could try mechanically moving them, but and you might be able to kill a small patch doing that, but it's challenging. And then monitor over the next 3 years or so, monitor that patch. So if anything resprouts, you're taking care of it. But you'll be greatly rewarded if you manage the tree of heaven on your lands. Autumn olive is my next topic. Autumn olive is unfortunately the only redeeming factor is that it grows 60 pounds of fruit, but those 60 pounds of fruit are propagules, for the landscape as well. So even though birds will eat it, it's an instant results plant. And biologists had, thought they were great back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, but everybody learned that was a bad idea. So you want to knock these out wherever you find them. Here's an example for you. This invasive plant not only will close canopy on a field, it'll take over a field. Here in Southington, the site of Land Trust, I've been helping them. There's over 100 tree of heaven on an abandoned field that we cut down and chipped and are managing. I'm helping them manage. But I'm going to give you this personal example that I did on my 5 acres. And I'll show you how I did it. Here is autumn olive on either side of this native silky dogwood. See the silky dogwood? It's look like it's shrinking because the shade from these autumn olives are closing canopy on it. Autumn olive will suppress other plants around it. The autumn olive, becomes a monoculture on the land. Silky dogwood is a good larval food. It provides berries for wildlife during the fall. It's a very important native plant. One technique you can do is mechanical removal. I've used a backhoe, a small backhoe mounted on a small tractor. I bought that, second, that's a 3-point hitch, small backhoe that goes on a 3-point hitch tractor that we have at the land. And me and my kids plucked out many that were manageable by plucking them out. Then we cover up the soil so it doesn't, stay open. So you make sure that you cover those patches. And I also, with this little hoe right here, this hoe that I'm holding, and I'll give you an example. Here's a little video I took to show you, put a little muscle power in. Obviously didn't get all the roots, so next spring we're gonna come out here and make sure that sprouts are gonna get we're putting out as much soil back into the hole. This is part of mechanical management. So autumn olive can be killed both chemically and mechanically.
Just Pete, reiterate whatever you were saying there.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, you couldn't hear it? So what I demonstrated there was that hoe I used to mechanically remove that autumn olive from that field. That's over a 14-acre field, about 12 and a half, 13 acres out at Housatonic. If you saw that field, years ago in the early 2000s, it was covered with autumn olive, all kinds of stuff, honeysuckle, mugwort. We've been managing it. It's amazing how it looks today. But that, you'll always notice in any field you go into, no matter how well you manage it, like autumn olive is nitrogen fixer, so it'll grow rapidly. All of a sudden takes off, and you at the end of the summer, you're like, where'd that come from? Well, anyway, that patch, that one there, I showed how to take it out with physically. And now if that field was entirely, it'd be a lot of physical work. But there are times when you could do that. You could cut them out. Now, if that does resprout from the root, which it's not a big sprouter from roots, you can mechanically remove those, or you could foliar, and you'll have a reduced patch of to foliar spot tree. So I just wanted to show that mechanical removal technique. I also believe in chain and pull. So this ATV on 4-wheel drive, used as a tractor with a chain, you could wrap it around the stems of autumn olive, the smaller ones, the 1 inch or smaller, and you could you rip them out of the ground. And it's a fun way to work, and you could use a tractor as well. You don't have to use an ATV, but if you do have access to something like that, heavy duty 4-wheel drive vehicle, you can rip out a lot of plants mechanically. And you can see right here, the labor is worth it. We knocked out a lot of both large and small, but the saplings, the 67 saplings, are what you could use with a small chain. And then we've also will do foliar spraying on some that are small. If you have a big space, you can't do all mechanical. And then we've also treated the stems. When you cut them, treat the stems. So you take a chainsaw or a bow saw, you cut, and then you freshly put triclopyr on the stems. Like here, you can see here where we cut, and then you cut these lower. We make brush piles out of them for the rabbits, and then you go back after you make a fresh cut, as low as you can to the ground. You treat those with the triclopyr. So chainsawing, you can also use a woodsman axe. And you got to make sure that you put the triclopyr to prevent sprouting. I want to point out that some folks will use the blue dye so that you can see, this is the most important part of the stem that you need to cover the herbicide on. I usually cover the whole stem so that you can get some translocation, but really you just need to put it on this part. But the dye helps you realize where which ones you treated. You just got to be real careful with the blue dye because it gets all over your clothes and all over your equipment. You can see here, this is the name of the chemical that I use triclopyr a lot. That's my go-to herbicide. You could buy it over the counter as brush be gone. That's what people kill poison ivy with. If you have a big scale operation where you have lots of acreage, you're a land trust or a larger landowner, backpacks work fine, but ATV mounted sprayer is also valuable for larger, and you have a 25 or 50 foot hose that comes off the back of it. You can get a lot of work done that way. Of course, you have to use the PPE, the proper, personal protective equipment. But it is, if you get to larger properties, this is a technique that now it's for larger properties, and where you can't just mechanically remove everything. Replacement plants are important. If you want to replace plants, please consider the native vegetation, right? Whenever you plant back, and I could do a whole talk on, planting back native species, but this is one plant called, spice bush. The reason I love this plant is it's such a great larval food for this spice bush butterfly. And over the years, You know, I used to watch spice bush butterflies fly by me, and I enjoy watching them. But now I watch them, and they'll either go to a sassafras or they'll go to a spice bush shrub, and you'll see them. You'll watch them lay this egg underneath the leaf, and then the caterpillars that come out. You know, this is one of the instars, which looks like a snake eye. Look at this earlier instar. It looks like a bird dropping with a vestigial tongue. This is a vestigial tongue. It's not really a tongue, but it looks like a bird dropping. You know, nature is so fascinating. These is a great larval food, but these berries right here, these berries are feeding the birds during the fall migration when they need it the most. Fueling up birds that come through from Canada through Connecticut are feeding on these. Birds that are leaving here going south, birds that live here that are going to stay here are feeding on them. So always consider these native plants, these native shrubs are so valuable. And they turn a leaf, look at, they hide, the caterpillar hides in a curled leaf during the day. So it's even further not seen by wildlife, by birds. Here it's trying to scare the bird away. Here it looks like a bird dropping. Here it's hiding, and then it comes out at night to feed. There's another bird dropping like larval. We collected hundreds of seeds, and we had them contract grown by a local nursery on our land. I just want to share this with you because a lot of times you can't find native plants easily. So we collected the local genotype on our land because we removed a lot of understory invasives. So by collecting the seeds, we had a grower contract grow, and then we got them back as seedlings. We planted them in bigger pots, and then we put them in as, 1 or 2 foot tall saplings. And I encourage you to think about that for your land. If you can't afford buying, just plants, you could have somebody contract grow by collecting off your land. Just an idea for you. I want to throw that out for you as an idea. And then I'm going to cover mowing here as my last part of my talk here. A lot of people ask me, after I manage my fields, how do I keep them invasives out? So mowing can, once you kill the invasives in the fields and edges of your area, mowing can keep the invasives out. And that's if you mow. So if you mow at least 50% of your fields every year, you'll prevent invasives from coming in. Woody invasives need at least 2 to 3 years to propagate, to germinate. So if you kill invasives in your fields, you can knock out the invasives by mowing at least 50% of your fields a year. And that's what I strive for here on state lands and on my own land. Some people want me to do a third a year. Some of the entomologists have told me that it's better to do a third. I have a difficulty in convincing people or showing them in the field what third they mowed last year and what third, you're doing hundreds of acres. So you can do that on small scale, but I find that the 50% rule works. If you do 50%, you can achieve a 50% mowing rate, and people, you'll know what you mowed last year versus this year. You make a map and you do even odd years, and you flip flop the mowing. Very effective. And I always say, do not mow after March 31st. Do not mow, because American woodcock start nesting. They're already starting to nest this coming week. They're already calling and painting. And I'll share with you my own example. I always like to share my own example. So on my 5-acre field, I mow half of it every year. And this one year it snowed a lot. There was like 2 feet of snow. I couldn't mow. It got wet. Anyway, I said, I got to go do it. So I went out and I couldn't believe it. All of a sudden a woodcock flies up and lands next to the tractor. I slam on the brakes. And I thought the worst. I said, I hope I didn't run over its nest. So I shut off the tractor. I looked around the tractor. I couldn't find anything. I called my wife up, and she came over. We gingerly looked around. We couldn't find a nest. We couldn't find any eggs. So I lifted up the bush hog. I started the tractor, lifted up the bush hog, and I moved over. And what do you know? Watch this. underneath the bush hog are 4 eggs. I couldn't believe it. I didn't crack them though. It was just enough above. Now watch, you'll see where the female is right here. She's already coming back to get on the nest. See her right there? She's right there. Watch. You'll see a close-up of her right there. There's the eyeball. See the eyeball? There she is right there. See her? Right there. We took the cut vegetation and we put it around. I stopped mowing and she moved on to the nest. You know, they lay 1 egg a day and then they incubate for 26 days. And that I almost ruined all that effort. And thankfully, the back tire on luckily, this back tire on my bush hog, that would have ran right over it. It was like right under here because these tires didn't run over it. So look at how narrowly I missed that nest. Thankfully, I didn't kill that nest. But it's just a word of caution to not mow, after May 31st. It's very critical for our woodcock. This is an unfortunate turkey nest that was run over with a combine in June. All right, so some of you may or may not be convinced about this invasive plant management thing. I mean, you're at this talk and I know you're into it. There's still a lot of skepticism. This guy, Doug Tallamy, did a study. They looked at 4 invaded sites and 4 native, predominantly native vegetation. And they looked at the caterpillar biomass on both sites. They did it as a peer-reviewed scientific study, okay? And here's what they found. They found that there were 6 times fewer caterpillar species on the invaded sites. Okay, 13.5 times fewer caterpillars. So there's just evidence that's piling on that invasive plant areas are just not producing food for our wildlife and reducing the biological diversity. So, that's a study that points to that. And then if you plant or encourage native plants, they are so valuable. This is a study out of Rhode Island. Look at the fat content of our native berries. They're so valuable for our wildlife. Fatten up for the fall migration to stay in Connecticut. And I'm just gonna leave you with this. This is a real busy slide, but I want you to pay attention. The average number of animals that live in an area from season to season, the average number of animals are going to be dependent on the habitat. We control the habitat. If you improve the quantity and quality of the native habitat, plant by plant on the land, you can improve the average number of animals. Monarch butterflies, if you take a field, every milkweed that you save from being usurped by an invasive, or that you plant there or you give space for, you can increase the amount of monarch butterflies on that property, right? That's just a basic example, but you could extrapolate that over the whole land. So the quantity and quality of the habitat, if you improve it, you can increase the carrying capacity of the wildlife on our landscape. So you're striving to improve the land for these components. You want to improve native vegetation so you have early spring foods, summer foods, fall foods, persistent foods. You have cover, evergreen cover. You have native grasses and wildflowers for pollinators and bumblebees and all the different insect life that uses it and co-evolve. You have dead or dying trees that help wildlife. You want to have a landscape that's got diversity of these habitats components. How do you do it? Well, locate your boundaries of the property you're going to manage, right? Make an inventory of what's there. Determine how many invasives are there, where they are, and make a timeline. So draw a simple map, make an inventory, put the red dots where the invasives are, and start mapping it, right? I have an Avenza app on my phone that is amazing. You could stand there, take a picture, write notes. It'll place mark where you are. You can write what it is, and then it'll put it on the map. You put a georeference map You could do Google Map, or you could get it off of ArcMap, and it'll geo-reference it. And you go back year after year. You can take a photo that geo-reference it to that spot. If you could do that, you go back after you treated the area, you'll see the improvement over the years. But start with this inventory. It's very important. Okay. And then always ask yourself, what is the habitat significance of this plant? If you do decide to plant things, does it provide seasonal food cover value for wildlife? Does it like dry, wet soils? What kind of soils does it like? Or, evolving? Does it like sunlight or shade? Ask yourself these simple questions when you're replacing invasives with native plants. Ask yourself these basic questions and try to match the plant to that area. And it's a plant community that you want to build. And always take that list of 97 invasives. Make sure that nothing you plant is on that list. All right. Observe nature. Nature will tell you a lot of times what it wants. Look at the adjoining woodlot. Look at a field that's only abandoned for 2 years versus 5 years, and see if there was naturally occurring vegetation. And look at what type of soil is there so that you can see what you might want to encourage there. So observe nature. And then predict these seasonal plant and animal interactions and try to increase that seasonal food and cover on that land. I was amazed. I was at the Connecticut River and I observed this one year, and it floored me. I saw these linear growing patterns here, and I was like, what the heck is that? So I went up and I looked carefully. The wave action of the water, we're planting the seeds that were falling from the trees, the silver maple and the sycamore trees that were buried under the sediment that was being deposited were started growing. So here's nature reclaiming its own banks. And the more you observe nature, it'll give you clues to what wants to grow there. And so I always say, observe nature carefully. It will tell you what it wants or show you what it wants. Make an inventory, make a simple plan, prioritize which invasives, manage those female invasive tree of heavens, right? Because they've got the seeds. Knock out the bittersweet vines that have all the berries on the top, because you don't want berries, spreading. Prioritize. Make notes of where they are so that you can go back and figure out where they are so that you can manage and make a plan. Increase the number of native plants on your property, whether it's a square foot or whether it's 5 acres, an acre, a quarter acre, eighth of an acre, whatever it is, you want to increase the native plants. And don't ever plant invasives. Diversify your plantings and don't plant any monocultures of things. Plant a variety of things. All right, so strive for these diversity of seasonal components. And I always want to point out, don't paralysize. There's this thing called paralysis by analysis, where we think it's difficult. It's not difficult. You just start small. Every plant you remove is one step closer. I find that once I start a project, it's like it feeds itself. And it's easy to procrastinate, but try, do it. Take a plan of action and start doing it. And then there's a thing called extinction by instinct. That's where we dive in too quick, right? Your friend has a truck, you go and buy some plants on sale, and before you know it, they're invasives. You don't take the list with you, the 97 list, or you start lopping everything and you don't think about treating the stems. And then you go back a year later and you got all these stump sprouts. If you take a little ounce of it prevention, you might stop the spread of the rhizomes and the lateral shoots if you think ahead. So try to avoid these 2 pitfalls. All right, I'm ready for questions.
Great, because we've got them. Okay, let's go back to the
I'm going
beginning.
to turn the lights on behind me because
Yeah, sure.
it's not dark in this room. All right, let there be light. Wow.
All right, this is amazing, Pete. Thank you so much. So let's see. How do you change the mindset of consumers in terms of color and desire to grow plants?
Thank you for that question. Biological diversity, if there's any species that is like a poster child species, it's monarch butterflies. If we plant turf everywhere and we don't plant, those perennials that are important for that species, it's gone. Then the color, I mentioned the burning bush. If you start looking out there, there's the high bush blueberry, low bush blueberry, huckleberry. There's a red chokeberry. There's so many species that have color that we ignore, that we kind of take for granted. I would say take a look at the natives, and you'll see that there are a lot of natives that produce beautiful color. 90% of the stuff you see in the fall is native. You do see the burning bushes, but a lot of people mistaken the burning bushes for the high bush blueberries and a lot of the nicer natives for assuming they're burning bush. So it depends on the understanding. I think if people learn that natives provide such a food source for wildlife, larval foods for our butterflies, that they'll start picking natives over just that mindset of beautiful color. I think you could have both if you really study it and start looking. You'll realize that there's a lot of beautiful native plants that give beautiful color.
That just reminded me that for folks who don't know, we started this program a couple weeks ago, and I just remembered that we do have handouts from that I didn't send out to this group. So I will make sure that we send you that list of, I believe you had all the invasive species on it.
Yeah, I have a 4-page handout. Hopefully, Rachel, if you could send it to everybody.
Yep, I can do that.
Email was at the beginning of my talk. You guys can email me. I'll send it to you by email. But I have a native suggested native sheet. Then there's deer resistant vegetation, thicket formers, thicket forming shrubs. And then I also have the invasive species list in my handout.
So we will send that out to you. They want to know how to get the desired grass seeds.
Thank you. So there are more and more companies that are making seeds available. And so on a big scale, I'll tell you what we've been doing on a big scale, what I've been doing to do big fields. I'll give you an example. We did a 24-acre planting last year with native grasses and wildflowers. We had to go to Ernst Seed Company, which is out of Pennsylvania. They have a mix that is regional, but some of it's local. There are more and more local seed sources that you can research. I collect a lot of my own seed, not hard to collect. You see this right here, this photo. This is a photo of little blue stems. See all these little fluffy seeds? At the fall, you pick them out, put them in a bag, and you keep it dry and cool, and make sure that you keep them where it gets cold, and it has to experience the winter cold, the stratification, and then, or you could just plant them outright in the fall. But you could do your own collecting as well as buying it on the market. There are more and more seed companies making native plants available. That's one company that I mentioned, Ernst Seed Company that I use, but I'm sure there's more.
Okay. And the triclopyr, can you get that?
So
where do you get that?
I want the audience to know that I personally have reduced and haven't been using glyphosate. It's a broad spectrum. Triclopyr only kills dicots. It kills only, so it won't kill grasses. So if I'm in a field and I have lots of little blue stem and deer tongue grass and other native species, big blue stem, Indian grass, the triclopyr won't kill the grass. So triclopyr is readily available over the market. Some of the big stores carry it, that carry landscape materials. So I don't know if I don't want to really promote any place, but You can find it over the counter. One brand name is Brush Begone. It's, I think, 8% triclopyr. You could buy higher concentration, but the triclopyr is over the counter.
Okay,
It can be used by, on your own land, on your property, if you're not getting paid to do it. Once you get paid, then you need an applicator's license to apply any herbicides, but you can buy triclopyr for application on your own land.
great. That was the next question too, if you have to be licensed to use it.
No.
Is there any, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, lesser celandine? Is there any in Connecticut? And can you control it that way, or do you have to use that other product you mentioned, the glyphosate?
So unfortunately, the lesser celandine grows in a floodplain area near wetlands. It's very challenging to manage. You'd have to, there are other, there's Rodeo, which is a glyphosate product, but there's also another product called the Mazapir, which is that's a registered compound. It's very challenging to go in the wetland areas if you need a broad spectrum and not use things like Rodeo. So lesser celandine is a tough one. It's a big area. If it's not, you can mechanically take them out, but they are definitely, they need a foliar, broad spectrum herbicide. And that's a tough one. Lesser celandine is tough.
If you have wetlands, if you're around wetlands, do you have to apply for an inland wetland permit as a homeowner?
So every town, so in Connecticut, we have what we call town rule, home rule. Every wetland agency can be stricter than state regulations, or they can, they can be varied from town to town. So you really should check with your local inland wetlands agent and ask them if it's required. So the best way is to ask your inland wetland agent if a permit is required, or at least you have to let them know that it's happening. But that's the answer to that. Inland wetlands are regulated by your local wetlands agency.
What impact does Garland 3A have on our groundwater?
Yeah, so I knew I was going to have a tough question like that. Garland 3A is an approved herbicide that's got EPA labeling, and you got to watch you got to follow the label. It is supposed to be only used as a topical foliar, and it's supposed to be able to be dried and not used when it's going to rain, or it's got to be allowed to dry on the vegetation. So as long as you use it properly and let it dry on the plant, is not dangerous for groundwater. So it has to be properly applied and properly utilized. I want to say I take using chemical management very seriously. I try mechanical as much as I can. I try mechanically removing as much as I can. If you look at if you manage lots of land, it's very difficult to do mechanical only. And so Garland, the triclopyr I found to be a useful tool to use, but I do use it very cautiously. And I've not heard of it having groundwater contamination issues with that. There used to be old chemicals like atrazine and simazine that were used in the past are no longer used, that were groundwater issues, like especially in tobacco field areas and stuff like that, the old agriculture. But I'm not aware of that with the triclopyr properly used.
How can you tell the difference between male and female trees?
Okay, so the female will produce the berries and the seeds. Okay, so like in the case of Tree of Heaven, you'll see seeds. You'll actually see hanging seeds. They're little winged seeds or blades, or like blades with seeds inside them. The males won't have that. They won't have seeds. Like winterberry has male and female. The Ilex verticillata, the red berried winterberry. The female has the red berry. The male still has a little flower in the spring, but it only provides pollen. It doesn't provide the egg, the ovary with the egg in it to then produce the berry. So it'll either have berries or seeds, and you only know it in the fall, unless you have to determine it genetically, which is difficult. But you can determine by the flower. But I would, it's obvious with tree of heaven. You'll see the old seeds still on the plant from last year. You'll see them, all right, still up there. You'll see them on the ground. You'll see clusters of seeds, winged seeds.
What's the easiest way to ID these plants on your land?
So you can use iSeek. You ever use that app iSeek or iNaturalist or Go Botany? These are phone apps. Very, very good to use. Once it's leafed out, very good at determining the differences. So I would recommend that. I would also recommend, getting, physical. Arthur Haynes' book is good for ID. Any of the, but today there's so many good apps. I would recommend using the apps on your phone.
Great. I'll look some of those up and we'll send those out with the recording. Yeah, somebody also suggested here, Go Botany
Yes. Go
to
Botany is
ID the
really good.
plants.
Yep.
Do you have an updated list of vendors who sell native plants?
Thank you for asking that. As we speak, this past week, it's about a week and a half now, I teamed up with Vicki Wallace at Yukon Cooperative Extension. And I used to have an availability list, a Connecticut native tree and shrub availability list. I used to update it every 5 years. And guess what? She encouraged me to get back into it. She has two great workers, Alyssa, and I can't remember the other great office assistant she has, that they're putting it online. We developed a survey, went out to all the nurseries, and we're compiling the information. Just coming in this week, we got, I think, 15 vendors already told us what we have a survey list. So coming to your computer soon will be an availability list, a Connecticut native tree and shrub availability list. And thanks to the cooperative effort between Yukon and us and myself.
That's great.
Yeah. So, we'll make that available to you guys. Look for that in the next couple of weeks.
Do you need male and female spice bush for cross-pollination and berries?
So there are male and female, but I don't think it's required. I have not studied the biology of that plant too well. I believe I'm not sure about that one. I'd have to look that one up. They have good years and bad years of seed production, but I've not noticed the male and female. I really have to look that one up. Thank you for asking that question. I'm going to look that one up. That one I don't know. Winterberry is obvious. It does have the male and female. I'm not sure about spice bush. But a good rule of thumb is always plant a variety of that same species. And I'll share with you a quick mistake I made. One day we were replacing the understory with plantings, and when I went to the nursery, I said, I'm going to get all female. I want to get all winterberries with berries on them, and I'm going to, look around, and whenever I see a berry on one of the winterberries, I'm going to grab that one. And I let my kids know, my wife, I said, make sure you guys pick all the. Well, guess what? We ended up picking a dwarf winterberry variety, and I didn't realize I didn't read the label correctly. It was native, but it was a dwarf variety. It was a naturally dwarf variety. So when I planted it, it only grew to 3 feet tall, 4 feet, and the deer just munched that down. So I made that mistake. So I read the label now. So make sure you read the label that it's not a cultivar, a dwarf variety of anything you buy. But it's important to, I like to plant the female berry producers because obviously you get a lot more feeding of the wildlife with it. But you only need one male to cross-pollinate.
Could you say a little about what I think is the nastiest thing in our woodlands, the barberry? All of the openings created by all of these ash trees dying are quickly overrun with barberry. Any preferred method of control?
So whoever asked that question, I want to assure you, I have, me, my wife and kids knocked out 12 acres, GPSed 12 understory acres on our land, okay? It was so thick that you couldn't walk a straight line through the woods. I had to make paths to get to it to then start killing it. It was so much work, very difficult, okay? All I could tell you is you have to cut it all down and then treat the stumps. You could rip them out. I've done it with that hoe. You pop them out. You're going to be there for a long time if it's more than an acre. If it's small lots, you can mechanically remove. But a foliar triclopyr does it in. Like right now, they're already flowering. Not flowering, but they're leafed out right now. They're already leafed out. It's a scourge, but it's one, when I pick my battles, that I learned my lesson with 12 acres. Like I know what it takes. It takes like 14 years, okay, to knock out a 12-acre patch and be satisfied with it. Now, you could do it quicker, and if you get a professional company to come in, you probably could do it quicker. But without chemical control, you probably can't do big spaces. Burning it with the torch, you could cook it, it'll still resprout. It's a really tough one, but I could do a whole talk on it. It's worthwhile doing, but it's one that you got to prioritize your battles. It is one that's bad. The experiment station proved that it harbors ticks. It's bad, for everything. It's shade tolerant. It can grow in the understory. I knock it out, early detection, rapid response. I see it in any of my fields, it's done. But in a big patch, I have to think about whether I'm going to manage it. Like I got to have resources, people, help, resources, to do it. So just keep that in mind. It's one of those, you got to prioritize your battle. It's worth it, but it's going to be a lot of work. You have reverse barbs that when the barb goes in your skin, it's hard to get out. Just learn that too. I'm not trying to dissuade you from managing it. Do manage it, but be very careful. Wear heavy gloves. I used to wear welder's gloves when I was working in it. And I still kill it, but I've been finding that I'm managing fields and edges more than interior woods right now with the amount of fields and edges that I have on my plate, and I'm trying to prioritize for pollinators. And then I can mow it after I manage it. So I've been barberries on the edges of the woods or in the fields. I do manage it, but I'm not managing big patches of barberry right now. But it's worth it. It's just going to be a big job. Just know that. Be ready for a big job. If it's a big patch, it's worth it.
Who can come do the inventory for the homeowner?
Okay, so state, we don't do, we can't do that. We don't have enough staff to help the individual land. We do provide technical assistance to like land trusts. And when our foresters go out to look at forest land, occasionally we will go with them to make assessments, but you can hire private consultants. There are private consultants out there that if you look up, they do provide that service for you on a per acre basis. Like you could get work done at a per acre basis. NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, if you have 5 or more acres, they provide cost sharing to manage land. Cost sharing meaning they'll if you make a plan and you apply, you can manage invasives as part of that. So, but private consultants are probably, the most available person. But you don't underestimate your ability to do an assessment and delineate where they are, start mechanically removing or making a plan.
About those tree of heaven on the HMA, did that bare looking ground right underneath them have anything to do with the herbicide you were using?
No, so the chemical, so you know how that, I told you, the chemical, the Journal of Chemical Ecology found an allelopathic chemical in the, so that ground was all tree of heaven. It was stem after stem after stem of tree of heaven, and it kept growing like an amoeba. It was just a monstrosity amoeba patch growing. So when we drum chop mowed it, unfortunately, it chops it up, like, so it had a rough, so we had to kind of re-chainsaw some of them to paint the stems. We allowed it to re-sprout and then foliated it. If you go down there, I challenge you to find one. It's one of the most satisfying success stories that I've ever been involved in. If I can look back in my, all these years of managing invasives, Tree of Heaven was my most satisfying. When I managed the patch of the Tree of Heaven, it was probably it most satisfying knockout. And you go back and you say, this place was inundated and it's gone. It's gonna find me one, it's amazing. So I encourage you to manage it. It's one that you can look back and say, wow, I made a difference. And the same one's black locust. We knocked out 18 acres at Sessions Woods, a black locust, and it's gone. Not one's producing any seed. Well, there's a few around the roadside that we can't, it's not on our property that I can't do anything about.
Do the natives make money for the vendors locally?
The native plants make money. So, what's really great about our entrepreneurial system of working, these companies, I'm not going to advocate you for this, but I know Earth Tones very well, the nursery. I know both Kyle and Lisa, and I look back at when they started and how they've grown their business there with all natives. And even some of the bigger nurseries that didn't have any natives, now they have, all the nurseries are starting to carry native, because people ask for them, and they know that they're the better choice for the environment. So I think it makes money for companies. I think that they're starting to realize the value of these native plants, and people are asking for them, and it's so rewarding to plant these native plants and then see the results.
What about the legality of use of the chemicals?
So every herbicide has a label. You have to follow the label. So by law, and over-the-counter stuff that you could buy at like a Home Depot or Lowe's or Tractor Supply that's over the counter, you could go there as a homeowner or a farmer or a landowner and buy it and use it on your land. It's over the counter, things like Triclopyr, 2,4-D, the glyphosate. If you go on somebody else's property and you're getting paid, then it becomes illegal to apply without an applicator's license. You need an applicator's license if you're doing it for money on other people's property. But if you use if you use over-the-counter products on your own land, you don't need a herbicide applicator's license. So that the legalities are basically you have to follow the label, and you have to make sure that you're using it on your land. You're not getting paid for doing the work without an applicator's license.
Are the inland wetlands agents educated in the field of invasive plant species control?
Some are. Some in the wetland agents are very aware now of invasives and how they cause, degradation of our wetlands and of our land. So it's in the modern education now. If you go back 30, 40 years ago, people weren't discussing it in botany as much. Everybody knew about Phragmites and purple loosestrife, and in wildlife, I knew about the sparrow, the house sparrow attacking the bluebirds, and but we never really looked at this broader picture of what's going on. And now the insect life, as you know, there's the blight, the funguses now, like what killed our chestnut, American chestnut. took one, took an orchard tree, an orchard Chinese chestnut tree plantation to wipe out all of our chestnut trees, and that, so we're more and more acutely aware of the invasive nature of organisms. And prevention is worth a pound, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. The first step is never plant or buy invasives. Second, anywhere you have an invasive that you're able to do something about, do it, knock it out, because you will make a difference. And so that, it's that's my answer to that.
What can be used on bamboo in a wetland?
So now when you say bamboo, there's Japanese, they call it Japanese bamboo, but it's Japanese knotweed. It's a polygonum. That's not really a bamboo. It looks like a bamboo. So those, if you have an applicator's license, you can use what they call a Mazapir. If you don't have an applicator's license, it's on your own land, obviously. You can use rodeo, which is a glyphosate product. Those are the only two that I'm aware of that works on Japanese knotweed. I would look into literature more about it, but if you're a regular homeowner, you would have to use rodeo, which is a formulation of glyphosate that can be used in wetlands. Then a Mazapir is another, but that's a registered. You need to have an applicator's license to buy it.
Is there a way to put a financial impact cost number to presence of invasives on a property?
So if you called up a company and said, I have these 4 acres of barberry understory, they would come out and they'd probably charge you between $300 and $500 an acre to control it for barberry, for example. That's just off the top. Now, it could be more depending on the terrain and what it looks like, you could get things assessed. There is a publication by his name, the darn name escapes me right now. There's a publication that came out where they researched all of the economic costs of invasives in North America. And, Rachel, I can get you a PDF of it.
Great.
Send it around. I used to have it on the tip of my tongue, the author of it. But if you look up economics of invasives, you might find it on the internet.
Okay.
It's an amazing compilation of the cost of invasives. Like in that publication, I remember reading that it still costs like $100 million a year to manage the elm die-off, even though the elm die-off happened a long time ago, right? In Dutch elm disease that killed the elms in New Haven, Connecticut, the Elm City, Dutch elm disease. It was a beetle that spread that disease. There's still millions of dollars spent on the elms still dying, falling on wires and houses, and so the costs are amazing. Now that's an insect now, but invasives, there are people that put a dollar figure on it. Agriculture can tell you the noxious weeds that, like they looked at, knapweed, what spotted knapweed did out west. They did calculate the loss of grazing lands from this one spotted knapweed invasive. There are people that have put numbers to it. It's pretty high. Economically, it's a very, expensive damage to the land that, but managing it, you have a modest cost. It can be done. You have to look at an investment over 5 or 10 years when you manage a plot of land for invasives. You've got to look out 10 years. You got to say, okay, if I spend this much today, what will that field look like 5 years, 10 years down the road? You'll see the improvement, and then the management gets less and less. You'll start seeing that, when you start year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are heavier workload than later. You probably put a cost on that. We keep track of how many acres we manage, how much product we use. And we've been, we noticed that some fields, it just, drops off the amount of need for backing out stuff. And then like that one, you know, that one autumn olive that you saw me, that was so exhilarating to do, because when I remember that field in 2003, what it looked like versus now. And then I was able to knock out that one autumn olive with that hand tool. It's very rewarding. And you can get to that point with your fields if you want to. You guys, you know, half of that field was mowed this year. We mowed half. Support services that work for Deep mowed half of the field for me, and they alternate every year. And that's the field that Tree of Heaven was on the side as well. You go out there, you got Monarda, you got little blue stem, you got just, you know, we have some species of special concern out there. I don't want to tell too much, but anyway, they're beautiful, beautiful out there.
All right, so I'm going to save this chat. I'm going to send the handouts. I'm going to send the link of this recording, and I'm going to send out the link of how to sign up for Saturday's program. And I think that's everything. Thank you so much, Pete.
You're welcome, Rachel. And I want to put a shout out to like Ron Pitts and the guys that are going to do the work on Saturday. So Saturday, I'm giving a talk to Bethlehem Land Trust. So just so you know, I'm doing another invasive talk on Saturday. So I'll be there. I have given walks at Hawk Hill. I want you to know that, you know, we've always had lots of turnout there, and I hope that they continue to chip away over there at the invasives. It's such a beautiful place. It's got some of the most beautiful trees up there, and the vista and the beautiful. And so I just want to give a shout out and thank you to all the efforts of the Winterberry Land Trust and all the things that, you know, Rod Pitts and the rest of the folks there are doing. You know,
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for being great habitat managers. Thank you for, you know, and you guys out there, thank you for giving, you know, listen, you know, being here tonight. I'm available if you guys want to call me, email me. You know, we're all habitat managers, and we all can make a difference. And I really appreciate all that you all do.
Thank you so much. Really quick, somebody did have a great question here. Since we know that invasives degrade habitats and the value of the land, why can't we get the state government to provide support for removal?
So the NRCS, as I mentioned earlier, Natural Resource Conservation Service, has a grant program that you, as a landowner, you can apply to. It is for 5 acres or more. It's under the Farm Bill. It's called the EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. So there is funding there. On state lands, we've been managing our wildlife management areas and our fields and edges. We have prioritized to manage our fields, edges, and special habitats. So we are doing a lot. But the NRCS does have funding available. NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service. Please look them up. If you're a land trust or a landowner with 5 or more acres, look into that. The Forestry Division provides a half a day or, you know, several hours of, they'll look at your land. And if you have, I think it's 10 or more acres in that case, you have to be a forest landowner. You can call a service forester to come out. Occasionally, I will go with those service foresters on special situations. We don't have as much staff to do that, but yeah, so there is some funding available. It's NRCS makes it available, Natural Resource Conservation Service.
All right. Thank you again, Pete, for spending
All
the
right.
time with us. Great information. Everyone really appreciated it.
Thank you. You're welcome. And good luck, everyone. Have a good spring, and please knock out those invasives. And you have the whole summer and fall.
Thank
Spring,
you
summer,
again.
fall.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Take care.